Welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape, UMC.org's podcast to help us keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. I'm Crystal Cavanis. For more than 20 years, Annette Spence has told the stories coming out of the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church in her role as editor of The Call, the conference's weekly newsletter. Many of these stories are about how church members eat together and use food in ministry. Today, we talk to Annette about the importance of food to share God's love and connect with our neighbors, a practice that Jesus understood well. Annette Spence, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you, Crystal. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. You are no stranger to those of us at United Methodist Communications. For more than 20 years, you've been the editor for the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church, telling the stories of United Methodists throughout East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and North Georgia. And you are a wonderful storyteller, and I could spend hours chatting with you about all the different stories that you've had the chance to share through the years. But today, we want to talk to you really on one aspect of your storytelling and what has become a personal ministry for you. Let's talk about food.
All right.
So, what does food have to do with faith?
Well, that's been a journey for me, is to figure out what it does mean. I've cared about food and cooking for a very long time because my first job out of college was working for a food magazine in New York City at Weight Watchers magazine. And I think then I can remember times as a child loving to cook, but I think that's when the passion for it really took off, was for recipes and trying new things and learning new things, and have always loved cooking for family and friends, and with mixed results. But I think it was pretty recently, like within the last 4 or 5 years, that I started to put it together that it could be a calling. And then, of course, I'm not the first person to realize that. So a lot has, it's just I had ongoing ministry and communications, but this just added this exciting new element to how I live out my faith and how I carry out a ministry. I'm married to Michael Feely, and he was the one who kind of inspired me to take this a step further. So we began a food ministry at a church that's not even my own, a United Methodist church that's about 30 minutes away from me, that seemed to have a community that was very diverse in terms of many folks from other countries and even other faiths, and many food insecure folks. So we started a food ministry there, which is ongoing for us. It started because we wanted to reach out to young adults. And I have a couple of young adults in my family, and we cared very much about trying to find a way to reach out to them. We had a successful monthly fellowship meal that did call people from who don't go to church, who come from other churches and from other faith traditions. But it was a lot of work, and I'm not sure that we always hit the mark. I sometimes felt like we were just kind of doing what we were just having a fellowship meal for United Methodist, which is not a bad thing, but we really wanted to reach people outside of our own circle. And then the pandemic came, and we began a drive-through ministry about a year ago that started reaching about 30 people. And we just had one last weekend, and we fed 197. So
Wow.
We're busy.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago, it was such a blessing for me to be able to be there with you on that Saturday and see it in action. And it's a busy day. It's kind of a hectic day, but it felt like friends were just pulling in and chatting, as of course you guys were keeping it safe in this time of COVID, but it felt really friendly, like a community. It was a community lunch, Annette. That's what it felt like to me.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because we worked hard for that. The original idea to reach out to the young adults and, to be honest with you, the bar crowd, which is where my sons seem to have community and all their friends, that was who we were going for the fellowship meal. And again, we hit that, folks, when in-person fellowship meals, we hit that with some results, but not great results. So when we began the drive-through ministry because of the pandemic a year ago, it was like, how can we reach people while they're in their cars? And ironically, I mean, obviously, it'd be better if we could spend some time with them and pray with them and all that, but a lot of that actually happens. We've come up with sort of a plan where there's 2 or 3 church members, including the pastor, who is actually involved in this. This is a very tiny church with about 15 in worship, average worship. Most of them are not joining us. There's a regular couple that joins us and the pastor and his wife. So we put the actual church members out front to be like our hospitality people. The pastor directs the traffic. The 2 church members hand out water bottles and whatever treat of the day. It might be homemade dog treats. Last week we had Girl Scout cookies that were donated to us. At Easter, we may give out children's packets, or we'll give out hot chocolate at Christmas. But so they're out on the front and they're chatting people up. We literally take orders at the car windows, and my husband and my niece, they interact with the folks. And then we have somebody else like coming along and delivering the bags of home cooked food or food that we put together. So we feel like they get 5 or 6 or 7 touches. And we also have a very good Facebook page where we literally survey them on what kind of food they like and what kind of condiments to add or what kind of side dishes to have. And some folks actually do engage with us quite a lot with that. So it took a while, but after a year, if you can have a community through a drive-through ministry, I think we figured it out.
Well, it's a really beautiful expression of your faith. And I love that you've all kind of come together. It's not a single church's offering, it's an outreach that several of you have done. It really does show the connection in action.
Yeah, and we couldn't do it without, there's a lot of retired pastors who join us. My husband and I, because of my full-time job, we know a lot of people. They all get a big kick out of us and they come. As I said, we have folks who don't go to church. We have a fair amount of young folks some of them are relatives. We tap into the UT students. We had 2 college students come who'd never been there before last Saturday. And folks who just know people who know people. The volunteer ministry part of it is actually a little surprising for me because I knew I would care very, very much about the people we were reaching, but I find myself thinking as much now about ministry with our helpers and how to keep them engaged and how they interact with each other, and being intentional about setting out food when the meal's over so that everybody can sit down and enjoy this food together and talk. And they do, after years of writing about stuff where it's so hard to get people to engage sometimes, this seems to be a really natural way from people with different backgrounds and from different situations and of different genders and ages and sometimes, race, and they're able to have a conversation.
What do you think it is about food that enables that?
I think, what's interesting about food is that when I remember earlier in my ministry as a United Methodist communicator, I was less interested in food stories sometimes because to me that was like, oh, everybody does a food ministry. That's not that interesting. And I was always looking for the trendy things. But as I've spent more and more time in this, I realized everybody ideally eats 3 times a day. And you can give somebody a bag of groceries, but they're going to need another bag of groceries or another meal, or somebody's going to have to come up with something pretty soon within a day. Or so I realized there's just so many opportunities for sharing food, and it is a common denominator. Like there are people that we deliver food to. It's not really a delivery ministry, but we always have 3 or 4 or 5 folks who ask for it, and we may even expand that and make that a bigger part of our ministry, because we realize that the folks who are literally driving through are probably privileged in some ways because they have transportation. But we have a few places that we deliver, and those folks will reach out to me, and we might not have a lot of other things in common, but we can talk about food. They'll write me and ask me how we made the potato salad, or I'll literally walk out to the car sometimes and talk to folks about what they like or what they didn't like. Last weekend, a lady had written me and says, "I really don't like the onions that you put in your potato salad." And I said, "All right, I'll make you potato salad without onions. That's not a problem." And so then I have a chance to interact with her, and I have a chance to learn her name and fix her a thing of potato salad with her name on it. And so it's a common denominator. You cannot have a lot of other things in common, but you can have a conversation with people about food. And again, it's something that everybody's concerned with because everybody's got to eat.
Well, tell me about the call to cook.
Okay. I'd love to talk about the call to cook. I wish I could work on the call to cook 24/7. And it really does go hand in hand with this food ministry, although I didn't see that coming. The call to cook is what I call a food and faith blog. It started, I think it's 2.5 years ago. I literally had a new boss. And I've said this before, I was kind of trying to impress them. And I had no idea that this just like popped out of my head or my mouth that day. And we're talking about new ideas. And I said, well, what about a food and faith blog? And the newspaper that I worked on for Holston Conference, the name of this publication is The Call. And in some ways, I've become synonymous with The Call. And it just occurred to me that we could call it The Call to Cook. So I set up through WordPress a little food and faith blog, and then the pandemic came, and all these opportunities for writing about food and churches and the way people show their love through food emerged. I mean, I could write about it 24/7, and it is a labor of love. And so many churches are involved in cooking for people that they want to love, and so many individuals, especially during the pandemic, came across ideas that, oh, I love people and I've got this extra time. Now I'll make lasagna for people. So that's what it's become. I've focused mostly on hosting conference, but lately I've really been intrigued with actually writing about food and faith in other parts of, the denomination. And it's a matter of time, but I have some ideas and a list of places that I want to visit and places that I want to call and learn more about their food ministries and their cooking ministries.
Annette, I've heard you refer to preparing food and feeding people as very Jesus-like, as a very Jesus-like thing to do.
It's like such a no-brainer, but and I can't believe that I didn't see all my life that that's been a way of showing love. It's so obvious. We all do it with our families and with our communities, but so much of Jesus's time was spent around the table with folks, and of course, there's Holy Communion, and over and over and over, you see how food and time at the table and just sharing that is so central to our faith. It's almost overwhelming for me because there's just so many examples of how it manifests itself in the Bible and in the stories and through time. And all this is kind of somewhat new for me, but it's not new. It's not new in our faith tradition or for Christianity. I've done a lot of reading lately and listening to podcasts a lot about how we treat the earth and how, what we eat is a theology. And so we actually tried to share some of that through the food that we share at Norwood United Methodist Church, where our food ministry is. And I've said to you and to others that we try to hit that sweet spot with, I mean, I care about nutrition. In fact, my first job at Weight Watchers magazine, of course, was a lot about nutrition, and I've written a lot about that over the years. And I care a lot about sharing local foods and supporting the farmers. But then I also really, really care about what people like and how they experience love. So in the same way that I really care about how my children get the foods that they really love, today is one of my son's birthday. He is 28.
Mhm.
And earlier this week, I drove him country fried steak, mashed potatoes, and all his other favorite foods down to his place and left it in his department. Well, that's the same thing that we try to do with our food ministry. We say, what do you love? What do you miss? What do you like? And so we try to hit the sweet spot between working in some nutrition in there, getting some fresh fruit in there, getting some local vegetables into the pasta salad or whatever, but also, what do you love? And it might not be healthy. Hamburgers or potato salad or baked beans or, my gosh, ham, mashed potato casserole. We did a fish fry. That's when you joined us. It might not be healthy, but we shared that love with them that way, in the same way that we would share it with our children. And I'll add this, like, we even care about their dogs because they love their dogs. So we realized there's a lot of dogs who come through our line, and we've started making whole wheat peanut butter treats, and they love that stuff. So who knows what other food ministry we'll be doing for pets in the future.
Well, that meal you described that you made for your son, yeah, that is definitely love wrapped up in a plate of food for sure. That sounds delicious. And speaking of food that makes people maybe smile or have warm and fuzzy feelings, how about green fluff or strawberry fluff, or in our family we call it pink fluff? You've actually been interviewed about green and strawberry fluff. What does that dish have to do with church?
Well, and that, there's an example of something. I often say the foods that we prepare, some of them are what I like, but sometimes they're not even what I would choose. I certainly make a potato salad that I wouldn't choose, but we literally did a survey. I keep bringing it up because it's one of our most popular things. We literally did a survey with what kind of ingredients they like. The strawberry fluff or the pink fluff or the green goop, I've heard all these names. I think it was Easter time, and we were coming up with all our, favorite foods of the holiday. And I remembered as a child, and pretty recently, making a concoction of Cool Whip, cottage cheese, in our case, crushed pineapple, and Jello, and sometimes nuts. And we decided to do it with strawberry Jello and put strawberry topping on it, so at least we could say we added some fresh fruit. And it turned out to be a huge hit. It shocked us. We had all these other things like ham and this fancy potato casserole, and we did deviled eggs, which I didn't want to do because it seemed like too huge of a feat. But then we had like 3 or 4 volunteers rush in and go, "I'll make you the deviled eggs." We have deviled eggs everywhere. And I thought, oh, that's what they're going to love. No, what people came back to us and said, "Oh my gosh, my grandmother made this, my mother made this. This is so good." And it's like the simplest, cheapest, unhealthy thing, and they loved it. So we got a big kick out of it. I put a recipe for that on the call to cook and moved on to the next meal. And then we hear from Religion News Service. It was also a popular as some other places. It kept getting picked up on Pinterest, and there was a local place called Knoxville Eats, a social media site, and it got very popular. And I kept getting hits on the call to cook. And then we hear from Religion News Service, and the beat reporter, Emily McFarland Miller, I guess her beat is United Methodist Church, had just reached out to say, what food do you connect with church? And all these folks had written to her and said, this green fluff or whatever they call it, green goop or pink stuff or whatever. And she ended up doing a story on it. She did a fantastic job. I would have never thought of it as being as connected to the church that it is, but it was apparently a staple of potlucks, church potlucks as well. And it says home and family and all those things that we talk about at the takeout meal at Norwood United Methodist Church. So that was fun, and probably one of the most popular things on the call to cook, at least right now.
So that recipe is still out there, Annette, that people can go and find
It's still
it?
out there. It's being picked up. Yeah, the address for the call to cook is thecall2cook.com. There's a numeral in there instead of TO. It's numeral 2, thecall2cook.com. And it's still being picked up. It's in every Southern Junior League, church potluck, whatever, all those fundraiser. It's everywhere, but it's still popular on our page as well. And I'm really glad that we did that. And we'll probably do it again come Christmas or something because our folks love it.
We'll share that link on our on the episode page too, so folks can go to get that recipe if they need it. If they don't have it memorized already, they can get that. So I have a couple more questions, Annette. What's your favorite food ministry story? The story that you just love the way United Methodist were using food in ministry.
I'm not sure if they do this anymore, and there's so many examples. I mean, there's so many cool things, and I've written about a lot of them for Holston Conference. But I'm thinking of a time that a food ministry, and this is long before the call to cook or a lot of other things came along. It was probably 15 years ago. and a church, it still exists, First United Methodist Church of Independence, Virginia. If I had to pick 10 stories, this would be my favorite. It's a very small area, not a lot of restaurants, nice restaurants nearby. And every spring, they would do this fancy, nice dinner for the senior prom students. I mean, they had shrimp, they had steak, they had fancy glasses. To this day, I actually want to pull the pictures out because to me, it was just like, it was beautiful and it was fun to be at. These folks, these young folks all showed up all dressed up, and this church, which is kind of a small church, they busted it, rented a limousine, I think. That has got to be one of my favorite food ministries, and I really need to find out if they're still doing that. I've seen so many other things that people do. There's a church that I recently wrote about at Rocky Top United Methodist Church, an area that really, has been underserved and forgotten. And they have a tiny little congregation and they literally have homeless folks. I mean, I will write them and say, I've got this many sausage biscuits left over from our food ministry. Would you like to have them? And it'll be Sunday morning and they'll go, yes, the homeless folks are literally waiting outside by the door. So that's one of the most recent places that inspire me and bless me and bless so many other people. And I'm just impressed by how every church, I do mine a certain way. Not everybody would necessarily agree with how I do things. Like I get a lot of pushback sometimes because I want to peel those potatoes instead of using potato flakes, and I want to go buy local fresh corn rather than buying it frozen from Walmart. That's the way I want to do it. But what I'm impressed by all these local churches and food ministries, the Wesley Foundations, is how they find the best way to either cook or prepare or canned foods or whatever. I do think they see their people and they figure out the best way to do it with the resources that they have on hand. And if I could spend a lot of time writing about that and just traveling around and seeing how that happens, I would love that.
Well, I've heard you say that you always have a long list of foods that you wanna cook and also eat. So what's at the top of your list?
Oh, that's a good question. When I travel, I'm on the road a lot for both work and family, people who need me or need help in different ways. And I listen to all these podcasts and oh my gosh, I'd have to think about it. I mean, some of it, even though I love all the fancy, this is crazy. It's so like baked beans. I crave baked beans. And there's greens. There's so many different kinds of greens that you just want to learn how to cook and like the way that they should be cooked. I'm having a hard time coming up with it, and I do have a stack of cookbooks right now next to my bed of things that I just want to try. And sometimes when it comes down to it, it's just like I look in the refrigerator and say, "We've got a lot of that. I guess we better, I guess we better cook that today." So
Whatever's on hand.
yeah, and my husband likes to go to farmers market, and he brings in all kinds of things that I first like, "Oh, we don't have space in the refrigerator for that," but it does inspire you how to learn how to cook things that you might not ever have cooked before. So
Well, Annette, before we go, there's one question that we ask every guest on Get Your Spirit in Shape. How do you keep your spirit in shape?
well, and I've thought about that, because I'm so fortunate my work, and I'm sure you can identify with this. I'm in the middle of listening to other people's faith journeys all day long, and working with wonderful leaders who model, how to keep your spirit in shape, who literally pray, staff prayer, or you just have so many examples. I feel like I pray all day long, but I sometimes have to get back and be more intentional about taking that quiet time early in the morning. And it's not fancy, but just sitting with the 2 or 3 books that I like. One is the Common Prayer with, Shane Claiborne was one of the authors of that, and Bishop Reuben Joad, his Guide to Prayer. I really try to get back to that. Don't do it faithfully because I need that quiet time. But really, also, with so much clutter in the day and so many competing needs, even if there's something pressing, is just walking away from it all and taking a walk and breathing deep and just knowing, being still and knowing that God is there and listening to what's going on around and clearing the clutter. because there's so many competing needs and so many things to do. I literally have to stop and pause and be quiet sometimes to know what I need to do next. And I would have laughed if anybody had told me that I was going to be that kind of person 20 years ago, but now I don't know how to get through the day without it. So
Good words, Annette. Thank you. And thank you for serving the church in the way that you do and for your ministry. It's really important. And I've so enjoyed talking to you today, having you a guest on Get Your Spirit in Shape. And thank you again for being here.
you're very welcome. I'm so glad to have been with you all. I appreciate the work that you do as well, and just so happy to be part of the United Methodist Church.
That was Annette Spence, editor of The Call, the weekly newsletter of the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church. To learn more about Annette and the various food ministries she talked about today, go to umc.org/podcasts and look for this episode. In addition to the helpful links and a transcript of our conversation, you'll find a link to my email address so you can talk with me about Get Your Spirit in Shape. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Get Your Spirit in Shape. I look forward to the next time that we're together. I'm Crystal Cavanis.